There seems to be a lot of interest in how to use the Sonoff Basic in a three-way and multi-way configuration. So what I thought I'd do is do a little bit of a whiteboard to explain how you can actually use the Sonoff Basic in some sort of different scenarios with multi-way switches. There's a video out there already by DrZZs, really excellent. He has an excellent series of videos which I will link down below. Basically talking how to use the Sonoff in a switch configuration. He also has one out in using the Sonoff with multiple Sonoffs, using Home Assistant automation to do a multi-switch, multi-way configuration for lighting with the Sonoff Basic, and it works really well. He does just a great series of videos. Nothing on the way more professional than I'm going to do here. But in any case, I wanted to show you a couple different scenarios that you could do with a multi-way switch. Okay, so the multi-way switch scenario that I have up on the whiteboard here is one not really covered by DrZZ's video. It's a little different scenario. In DrZZ's video, which is a common scenario you'll see with three-way switches, in his video he had a scenario where the power was coming into a box that had a three-way switch in it, and his load was somewhere else. His lighting load was somewhere else, and there was no power in the box. And his solution, which is a very good one, is to use Home Assistant automation. He placed a Sonoff in both boxes, this one here and this one here, and then used home automation with an MQTT server to actually synchronize both of these switches such that flipping either switch, in his case I think he was using a push button, which is a little different wiring, but you can push either button and turn the light on and off. And that's a great scenario. You'll find a lot of homes and a lot of three-way switches where the power is actually coming in to one switch box with a switch, three-way switch, and then your load is in a different switch box with a three-way switch. So that's a common scenario, and you definitely can wire it up that way. The disadvantage of that particular scenario is that you have multiple Sonoffs. If your MQTT server and or your Home Assistant is down, then there's no way to keep the Sonoffs synced up. And in fact, in that scenario, if you flip the switch or press the button in the box that doesn't have the load in it, it's not gonna turn the light on and off. You have to actually have both the Wi-Fi up, the MQTT server up, and the Home Assistant automation up and running in order for that scenario to work. But in certain cases, that's your only choice. In other scenarios, you have situations where the load, your lighting, is in the same box with the power. And in that scenario, you could potentially wire things up the way DrZZs showed, in that you could send power over to the second box and have a second Sonoff in and use home automation or Home Assistant automation to synchronize them. But that is not the best scenario in that case. Again, you have the situation where they all have to stay up, and then you actually are sending power in between the boxes, which is unnecessary in this case. So what I want to show here in this diagram is the scenario which I have in my wall and in almost all situations in my house. And I'll show you a little bit later in the video one specific situation like that where I'm actually wiring it up now. But again, my power is coming into the same box as my load. Okay, so what we have here is a single Sonoff Basic that we're using. We connect the power that's in the box, we connect it up to the neutral and the load, or sorry, the line on the Sonoff Basic. okay, with the white and the black to neutral and line. Okay, don't get those screwed up or your Sonoff Basic is toast. Okay, then we have the white hooked from the white neutral coming in from the power. We literally pigtail that and go directly off to the neutral for our light or our load. Okay, so that's actually just, comes in wire nutted. One pigtail goes to the neutral on the line side, and then the lighting goes out. Okay, on the load side of the light, we have the black coming from the light, and we of course tie that to the load on the other side of the Sonoff. Okay, one thing you'll notice, which is different than a lot of people are doing, there is no need to send the neutral through the Sonoff in this scenario. The Sonoff Basic has load, line, neutral, and the neutral going through the Sonoff Basic because it's actually set up to be used, for instance, on a lamp cord where you can literally just plug it in line in the lamp cord. But in our scenario, there's no need to send the neutral through the Sonoff. The only thing we need to send this through the Sonoff is the line load connection. Okay, so this one is just hanging out here. And that's actually a safer way of doing things, not sending the neutral through the Sonoff. So wire it up, this way. Okay, now comes to switches. Okay, in my scenario, I have two three-way switches in each of these two boxes. This is box 1, this is box 2. I have two three-way switches, okay? And as a primer for three-way switches, there are tons of videos out there, but most three-way switches from the US are kind of wired up exactly the same way. Usually you have two inputs on one side and then one input on the other. The way these are actually configured to work, and you can use your multimeter to test continuity to see how your particular switches work, but almost all of them work the same way. The lower one here, or upper one in this case, that's kind of all by itself, okay, on the one side of the switch. The three-way switch simply switches this to either that one or that one, depending on which way the switch is configured. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to take the ground pin in the Sonoff Basic, the ESP8266 ground. In my case, I use the black wire. You can use any wire. This does not have to be, 120 volt rated wire. This can be, low gauge, whatever stuff you use on a breadboard type of stuff. Definitely has to be insulated, but it can be very, very small because we really have almost no current going through here. Just simply take that and wire it up to this post on your three-way switch. Okay, then you take your GPIO 14 from your Sonoff and you're going to send that over to the other switch. Okay, and you can send that, in my case, I think I have a diagram out there. In this case, I chose the white wire. Okay, again, for you guys who've never seen a three-way switch, there's always a set of 3 wires. It's really 3 wires plus a copper ground that go between the switch boxes. Okay, and they typically in the US, they have a white, red, and a black. Okay, in this case, I'm using the white wire. Okay, and I'm going to send the GPIO 14 signal over to the other switch. And I'm going to put it on that same terminal that we were showing the ground connected to over here. It's the one that actually switches between these 2 other terminals. Okay, so now we have ground coming into the first switch, and we have GPIO coming into the other switch. Okay, and for those who haven't seen any other Sonoff videos of using them as a switch in a wall, basically, if you set them up for switch, if GPIO 14 is grounded, the relay will be set and the power will flow. If you break that connection, GPIO 14 is coupled high inside the Sonoff, so the light will go out. Okay, and that's if you go in and configure it, the GPIO 14 as a switch in the software. Okay, so in this scenario, if you flip this, okay, so GPIO 14 is going to flow over here, and it's going to either be connected to this or this, okay, depending on which way you have this switch. There's no choice. It's going to be one or the other, okay? So if the GPIO 14 is connected to this terminal, okay, GPIO 14 is going to naturally be connected to this terminal as well, okay? If you wire it up, once again, I didn't show this, but going back, GPIO 14 to this terminal, your red and your black to the other two terminals on the switch. Red and black flow over here, and they're connected to these two terminals on this switch, okay? Ground, you really don't have to do anything with in this box. This is low current. Just, you know, if there's a way, if it's a metal box, well, then use your ground and actually ground it to metal. Otherwise, you can just simply coil it up and leave it in the box, okay? Ground here definitely should be tied. If this is a ground, you usually have a ground wire here. You should tie up your grounds in your box so everything's grounded, okay? But from a switching perspective, this is all low voltage stuff, and it doesn't involve the ground, okay? So red, black, I chose as the runners between the switches. They call them travelers, okay? And so this now works because if this switch is set such that GPIO 14 is on the red, it'll come over here, and depending on how this switch is set, it may connect to that red as well, in which case ground is connected to GPIO 14 and the switch turns on. Then if you flick this switch, it will no longer be connected to red. It'll go over here, connect to black, so the circuit's not connected, so the light goes out, and vice versa when you flip this switch over here, okay? So it's pretty simple. The neat thing is, you notice there's not a first of all, you don't have to have a second Sonoff, but also, as I said, it takes care of those potential issues where if your MQTT server and your Home Assistant is down, your light switches still work. Okay, the Sonoff, all the Sonoff needs, it doesn't even need Wi-Fi to work. All the Sonoff needs is power. As long as you have power coming into that Sonoff and you haven't blown up the ESP8266 chip, doesn't need Wi-Fi, nothing. It'll still work with the switches. Okay, the only thing in this case you would want the Sonoff with the Tasmota software. You know, you want that hooked to your Home Assistant because you want to be able to turn the light on and off and get notification and all that good stuff with your Home Assistant. But it's not necessary to make the lights function, okay, in this scenario. So once again, this is all predicated on a situation where you have the power coming into the same electrical box as your load or your lighting, okay? And by the way, this scenario works just fine in the situation where you have a multi-way switch, okay? Multi-way could be, this is, in the US, this is called a three-way, okay? In the UK, I think it's called a two-way, but this is called a three-way where you only have two switches. Multi-way or four-way would be one more switch in between. This scenario works perfectly fine. You do the exact same thing. The four-way switch simply sits here, and you could actually have multiple of these. So you could have a five-way, six-way, seven-way, but it just sits here, and it just crosses these wires over when you flip the switch, okay? So this same scenario works for a multi-way, four-way switch scenario with a single Sonoff Basic. Again, the key to all of this is that the power is actually coming into the box with the load, okay? So again, this is working with these sort of three-way switches that are in here. You can also do this with push button, and some people might prefer to do it with push button. I'm not sure why you would if you're converting, because it's, in my opinion, it's better just to simply use the existing switches and wall plates and all of that. But you can certainly do it with push button. So let me draw up on the chalkboard or the whiteboard here a little scenario, wiring scenario with push buttons, because it is just slightly different than this. All right, so I've redrawn this diagram a little bit, and it is simpler, certainly conceptually simpler, and possibly simpler to wire up for those who aren't familiar with three-way. But this is a scenario where you want to use push buttons, momentary push buttons, instead of an actual switch. And you have the three-way scenario with the power coming into the same box as the load. So in this case, again, you would, in between the switches, you would actually have a wire that has three wires, black, white, red, plus a ground. Okay, ignore the ground. Okay. In this case, all you need to do is wire up your GPIO 14 to black that's traveling in between, okay, and it goes to one side of your momentary switch. Ground, put it to the white, okay, wire that up to the other side of your momentary switch in the second box, okay, and wire it up the same way in the first box. So, GPIO 14 to one side of the momentary, ground to the other side of the momentary, okay. And so in this scenario, you've got a single Sonoff, multiple boxes, okay? You're just simply using the travelers here, black and white, to connect up with GPIO 14 and ground. In this case, if you push either button, any button, it will ground GPIO 14 to ground momentarily as you push the button. And then in the software, you set up GPIO 14 as a button instead of a switch. Okay, and then it'll work perfectly fine. So, if you're worried about the complexity of wiring, certainly this is simple conceptually. All you're doing is just using these, the three-way switch wire, black and white, send it over there to your other switch. And again, this can work with multi-way switches as well. If you have another one of these little momentary switches in here, okay, you just simply connect it up the same way. Connect your black and white to each side of these, okay, and you can have as many of these as you want, because the way the Sonoff works, when you configure GPIO 14 as a button, it works as a toggle on and off, and any of these, anytime GPIO 14 is grounded, it will toggle the light either on or off, okay. And again, it doesn't matter whether you use white and black, red and black, red and white, just as long as you're sending the GPIO 14 signal to one side of your switch and the ground to the other side of your, or not switches, but your buttons. Okay, it'll work fine. So that's the scenario. Let me also just show you a clip. In my house, again, the scenario is this scenario. And frankly, you can't do it differently. You can't put Sonoff over in this box and try and use automation and so forth. It actually won't work because there's no power in this box. Okay, when your power comes in the box where your load is, it's not sending the neutral over to box 2. You notice for the Sonoff to be powered, you need a neutral and you need a line. Okay. Well, when in the scenario, if back to the switches, if they're not switched such that power is going over here, well, I mean, they always have power going over here, but you're never going to have the neutral going over here. All you have is just this. Okay, either traveling on the black wire or the red wire typically over to this box. You can't put another Sonoff in there. It flat out won't work. So either this scenario where you're using buttons or the scenario earlier in this video where you're using switches is really your only solution in this scenario. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful. You can certainly ping me on YouTube if you have some questions. Let me just show you some video of some switches that I'm working on right now where we're going to wire this scenario up. I'm using the switches, not the original switches, not the buttons. So I don't know that this is overly helpful for you guys, but this is a scenario where the power is actually coming into the same box as the load. This is the other side of the three-way switch, hopefully without getting you guys dizzy. You can see this is going down into my basement. The other side of the three-way switch is down at the bottom on the right there of my basement. Okay, and this is the top of the stairs up here. And you notice in this switch box, all you see is the three-way wire with the red, white, and black, and the ground. That's it. There's no line coming in with power, and there's no load going out of this box. All you have is the three-way wire itself. What's actually happening is, in this scenario, they're sending power from the bottom of the stairway. They send the power, and the power only, up through the, let me look in this case, they're sending it up through the white. Okay, the normally neutral, they're actually down at the bottom of the stairs, they actually connect that to black, and they're sending the power up here through the neutral, and then it travels back down to that box down at the bottom of the stairway through either the red or the black, depending on which way this switch is thrown. Okay, and there's no way you can put a Sonoff in here because there is actually no neutral. All you have is the black, the power side. And do not be tempted to use the ground wire and hook that up to the neutral. That is super dangerous, and I think it actually would work, but it is dangerous, and do not do it. Okay, so there's no Sonoff in here, so you can't do sort of some of the other videos out there of how you would use a Sonoff in a three-way situation. It's not going to work. You have to use the way described earlier in this video in order to get that to work with the scenario. So hopefully this was helpful.